This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hello. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Headlines, brought to you by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. And with me today is Dave Atkinson, who's an integral part of our Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, as well as being a former top official within the Senate of Pennsylvania. With us today, for the first time, is Dr. Jamie Martin, and welcome. And we're very pleased to have her here. Besides being a professor at IUP and a specialist with corrections and criminology, she's also the vice president of APSCUF, which is the Association of Pennsylvania College and University Faculty Members. So welcome today.
Thank you for having me.
If you could start off, letting our viewers know a little bit about yourself and about the importance of APSCUF.
Well, thank you. Just a little bit of background. I guess I'd like to start out saying I'm a product of the state system of higher education, getting my undergraduate degree at IUP. I got interested in that field, I think, just by actually in high school thinking, why is it that people are committing criminal behavior? So that drew me to the field. And after that, going back for graduate degrees, after working as a probation officer, so I got to work in the field for a while. So I was always drawn to that element of the criminal justice system. For APSCUF, I do a wide array of things, so coming to Harrisburg when necessary, meeting with legislators at time with President Mash, working on committees there. So I do a wide array of things. I like to stay busy.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And with this being budget time, and that's always a problem, we're a very diverse state. We have a lot of higher education institutions, but I believe the state system is always shortchanged.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, can I give some context about corrections, perhaps?
Oh, sure.
And then talk about higher ed. I like to say I've spent a lot of time in jails and prisons. And during that time, I get to meet a lot of the men and women who are incarcerated and are in those jails and prisons. But when I start to see the number that are in there that probably don't need to be, and then consider what we spend. So again, just some context, we're 26th in the nation in the number of people we incarcerate, but 4th in the nation in the amount we spend. So in the current budget, we're spending about $2.5 billion on corrections. With 48,000 men and women in prison, that comes out to about $50,000 per inmate per year. When we look at the funding for higher education in Pennsylvania, currently it's about $1.5 or $6 billion per year. But that includes Pitt, Penn State, Temple, Lincoln, FIA, community colleges, and the state system. And in the state system of higher education, we have about 90,000 students. We're at about 468 million. And so if you look at the funding for each student, that's probably about $5,000 per student per year. So if you contrast that with the 50,000.
10 times?
Right.
Well, you're a product of the system. Charlie, who's our usual host, is a product of the system. I'm a product of the system. So that we have a great deal of sympathy for the
and I actually took some classes at Millersville.
State-owned university.
I was at Franklin Marshall College, but we had a good relationship with Millersville University.
We're kind of kin too. I think that people, they see the hierarchy of higher education in Pennsylvania. And so they're confused as to what is taking place at the individual universities in terms of change, in terms of what the universities are having to do to remediate students. The emphasis now on research and really connecting students to the workplace. Instead of sink or swim, they're really helping the students adapt to college life and succeed, hopefully within the 4 years. And so given your experience and everything, I'm interested in your perspective on that.
I think, over the decades, you always hear people say students are underprepared, and I think that's been something that's been said probably since I was a student, maybe since you were as well. But what I've seen over the time is maybe not, there is a need to remediate some students, certainly as they come in. But what I've noticed, the change is that students are having to work 2 jobs to be able to afford, to come to IUP or Millersville. Some are taking a semester off so that they can actually come back the next year. That impacts 4-year graduation rates. In terms of how it might impact a professor, if you're taking time outside of the classroom to work with students, to make sure they understand the material. But I think the big change has been the impact on the students in terms of how much it costs to come to college. So there's that kind of that combination of both. I've had students come into my office and say, I can't afford to buy the book for your class. I'm working 2 jobs. We just started a food pantry at IUP because we have students that are concerned about where their next meal is coming from, so they have food insecurity. So I don't know that I've seen a huge change in the level of preparation of all of our students, but I have seen this unbelievable burden that they're dealing with as they're trying to afford to be in the classroom.
Are you still seeing a large, or a rather large percentage of students who are first generation in their family?
Well, that's always been, I think, the focus of the state system of higher education is to provide the high quality, affordable education for often first-time generation students, but we're seeing fewer of those because of the cost. So we're seeing maybe now some students that before may have attended Penn State, because of increasing costs there, are shifting over to the state system of higher education. So we're losing the ability to educate the students that we were actually formed to educate. So yeah, we still see them, but I'm seeing fewer of those and seeing them struggle.
Well, it changes a lot too, because with the jobs not being the same, it used to be years ago you would go to work and 40 years later then you would leave. But now you probably have 10, 12, 15 different careers. And so what's wonderful about the state system is that helps retrain people, brings them back in. So I could see where there would be less of an emphasis on the first time, because we have people maybe coming back 2 or 3 times, or people coming back for the first time, in their 40s, because they need to do that, which I think is a great asset that should be pushed more, because our state system is throughout the state, and so some people might want to be further away from home, but it gives you that choice, and so it's always nice to have that choice to do that. But with that being said, and all these changes going on, and you brought up because of your background with corrections, and we see where we were going through different cycles, and one of those cycles was the fact that let's lock them up for a longer time, because then we won't have to deal with them for as often,
right,
with this. Now that's changed, and people going out, and that $50,000 per prisoner you're talking about. Do you have a plan to take those dollars that are saved from that and to put it in where it should, into the state system?
Well, I don't have a personal plan. I'd like to see legislators maybe come up with that plan on their own. I think beginning to see some of that. We're seeing criminal justice reform at the national level. I think there's some proposals here in the Commonwealth for similar things. But you're right, we took a get tough on crime approach for decades. So if we start to see some reforms in our policies related to sentencing, getting rid of mandatory minimums, some of the truth in sentencing types of things, making reforms in policies related to criminal behavior, taking out low-level drug offenders, those kinds of things, and actually looking at parole and probation as options, I think that would change quite a bit as well.
I think I saw in your background that you've also taught in prisons. So what is that prisoner like? That you're taking. Should there be an outreach by the state system into the prisons if there's being shortened? Should they have a pathway now?
I think it's critically important. We want individuals who leave prison to be productive citizens. Without an education, that's difficult. Just to give a quick background, the class that I taught, the students that were enrolled had to apply and be admitted to IUP, and had to fill out their FAFSA forms and be Pell Grant eligible. So when I went into the prison to teach, these men were incredible. I've told people it was the hardest introductory course I've ever taught. They were prepared, they were interested, they were motivated, they were dedicated. They were asking me to bring additional readings. So I took some of the master's level readings in for them. So absolutely, we have a captive population, many of them who shouldn't be there. So it was just like being in a classroom.
When people look at the state-owned universities, generally the analysis is that it's a much tougher environment for those in the western part of the state than those in the eastern part of the state. So what kind of things is IUP doing to develop community partnerships, to make better connections with local businesses, just to provide internships, to emphasize research that is not just pertinent to the classroom, but pertinent to someone on the outside.
Yeah, we're certainly struggling with the demographic facts there because we have fewer high school graduates coming in. They weren't born. So some of the things are going to be outreach with local community businesses. I'd love to see us get to a point where we could do some other kinds of outreach in regard to taking the talents of our faculty and providing services for community members. I think we've done a better job with internships, and I'd like to see us continue to do outreach for individuals who might be interested in retraining. And sometimes distance education can be a vehicle for individuals that are working but need to take additional coursework to maybe complete a degree. So we've seen some of that as well.
Is IUP working on collaborative ventures with sister institutions?
We have in the past. I know that there have been some. In my discipline, we haven't had those because we have such a large department, and I'm not completely familiar with all the ones that might be going on in other departments or disciplines.
Well, with some of the controversies, with funding in the state budget, and this is budget season, what do you hope or what do you hear from the legislators, asking the questions of the faculty of what you need, what is the present budget, what are the professors asking for, and is that reasonable to see that happen?
I think in the current proposed budget, Governor Wolf has indicated a 1.5% increase in funding for the state system of higher education. And while we're grateful for that, it would be wonderful if we were able to receive additional funding. There's also an initiative called the Pennsylvania Promise. And I think that would be a wonderful option. That would target primarily the students we were discussing, the first generation college students who may not be able to afford it. So that would provide up to 4 years of tuition and fees for students even attending community colleges, one of the public community colleges, or until they got an associate's degree. Up to 4 years of tuition and fees at one of the state system universities for families, children of families who make under $110,000, and even room and board for those from lower income, and also tuition at the rate of the state system for those attending one of the state-related. So being able to provide that kind of support would lessen the burden on the students, make a 4-year graduation rate more attainable. And again, if we shift some money from corrections, I know that we have only a single pot of money. But if we're able to shift some of what we're spending in that realm in criminal justice, and I'm talking about corrections, we also have policing and the courts that take up quite a bit of funding. So that would be a way to do both.
As a sort of wrap-up question, what would be your commercial on the value of a liberal arts education?
Okay, so I guess from personal experience, being a product, teaching in the classroom and even in the prison, what I've seen is that if it's accessible and affordable, it can be transformative in a person's lives and their career paths. And right now, it's not accessible and affordable. So if we want to transform lives, we're going to have to invest in those young people and make a decision as to whether we want to educate or incarcerate Pennsylvania citizens.
Now, our viewers are certainly want to know more about the promise, and see how that affects them. Mm-hmm. What website would you give for people to get more information and be in touch with you?
If they go to the APSCUF website, apscuf.org, that will take them to information related to the Pennsylvania Promise. And there's like a fact sheet that they could get.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for being with us today. And we'll be right back with the next segment.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back. And in this segment, we have an expert, Gene Barr. Gene is the president of our Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and one that's been known to all of our viewers, and we're so happy to have him back. Welcome back, Gene.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And tell us, when we get started here, what are some of the great things that are going on here with the budget and with the legislature and with the governor's administration and with business? That people, many times can be cynical, but right. I know here in Pennsylvania things do work well, and sort of highlight a couple of those things for us.
Well, of course, what's going on now in the Capitol is we're looking at the budget, and the good news, or perhaps the best news about that, is we have more money than we thought. Revenues are running about $800 million or so above for this fiscal year. Unfortunately, there was already some of that money spent. You guys know better
Almost
than
all
I.
of it.
Almost all. Some people quibble over what that number is, but a lot of it because of what the old supplemental budget that is something a lot of legislators are trying to figure out. Because what gets passed in June of one year, all of a sudden you say, because the supplemental is much higher by the time you get to the other.
Correct.
So,
and then they've borrowed from many other funds.
And borrowed from other
that
funds.
Should be paid
so
back
trying
now.
to get an accurate assessment of what the real budget is a challenge in any given year. So we're looking at that. But one of the good things about Pennsylvania is that we really do have to have a balanced budget, unlike the feds where they can go in the basement and print up money. We can't do that. Unfortunately, we do have to be cautious about moving stuff offline and transfers, etc. But it is certainly a somewhat more transparent process than we have at the federal level, let's say, and a fairer one, and I think one that's fairer to taxpayers.
One of the issues that's been getting a lot of discussion, and there have been meetings held at different parts of the state, is dealing with infrastructure. And
Yes.
in the old days, when we said infrastructure, we were thinking roads.
It was pretty narrow back then.
Right. It's been expanded to include water and sewer, internet, blighted neighborhoods. Yeah, we've had a quite expansive definition of infrastructure coming in. How important is progress on doing away with some of the deficiencies, some of the project waiting lists for employers and for workers in Pennsylvania?
Well, clearly it's important. A few years ago, 6 years or so, we did take steps on the roads, bridges, and highway side, and there was more money for mass transit as well. And by the way, for us, mass transit is an employer issue because a lot of my employers, a lot of my members, 50% or more of their people use mass transit to get to work, particularly in urban areas. So it is an employer issue. And we took critical steps about 6 years ago, and that was another case where the administration and the House and the Senate came together and did what they needed to do. Is it more money? Yes, it is. And people are paying more at the pump because all of the money that goes into that comes from when you go in and you fuel your automobile up, unlike other states that do it out of the general fund as well. But you're absolutely right in that infrastructure is much more broad than we've typically thought of it. Broadband's absolutely crucial. I've heard from some folks who have said because they don't have that ability, they've had to drive their kids down to the local high school to where they can find a Wi-Fi hotspot so they can do their homework. So getting that rolled out is crucial. We have a lot of aging water and sewer infrastructure as well. That has to be changed. And so we have to make sure that we have those updates so that Pennsylvania can be competitive with other states. We talk all the time about being competitive on tax policies and labor policies and energy, and we certainly do. But being competitive with our infrastructure is just as important.
Another important issue that everyone's working together, Republicans, Democrats, all four caucuses in the administration, is working on criminal justice reform.
Yes.
And then how that flows into workforce development. Can you tell us a little bit about that success story?
Sure, that's a good point. Right now, for our organization, based on what our members have told us, workforce development, that is the availability of people to fill jobs they have, is the #1 issue. We did a survey last year, and we do a survey every year, and every year we ask the old, what keeps you up at night? And typically it's taxes or health care or general state of the economy. Last year, for the first time, what rose to #1 was not finding the people I need to fill the jobs that any employer has available. And that could be for a number of issues. It could be because they can't pass a drug test. It could be because they don't have the skills and abilities. In many cases, we just haven't had those trained people. And Pennsylvania is a state that's unfortunately is getting older. And so we've made a concerted effort, and I congratulate Governor Wolf for taking this on by creating a workforce command center. He asked me to co-chair along with 4 cabinet secretaries and the head of the AFL-CIO. The legislature is also moving bills to make greater use of career and technical education, to move those along, because for far too long we've stigmatized anything that's less than 4 years. Look, we're all parents, and you sit there and you look at your kids and say, you're going to a 4-year school. In many cases, that's not necessary. And that's tough to say in Pennsylvania because we have some of the best educational facilities in the world in this Commonwealth. But it could be that a 1-year or a 2-year program, it will get you the family sustaining job that you need. And so we are trying to turn that stigma around, but we're also meeting right now every single week, talk about what Pennsylvania needs to do to not only meet our needs, but to make a workforce that will give us a competitive advantage. We saw what happened when we didn't have it, and many other states didn't either, with the Amazon decision. Amazon was going to put 50,000 high-paying jobs, 6-figure jobs somewhere. And what did they do? They had to split it because they couldn't find any place that could have 50,000 available people for that. So they split it. We were in the running for it. We had Philadelphia and Pittsburgh in the running. Unfortunately, neither was successful. So I think that was hopefully a wake-up call for all of us. What do we need to do to make us more attractive when that next Amazon comes down?
In a related issue, we're several weeks past Memorial Day.
Yes.
And across the Commonwealth, people honored the service and sacrifice of those who were killed. But part of that honoring is to fulfill the obligations to the veterans who returned home. So what is the business community doing to increase the hiring of veterans and really to put the proper emphasis on the leadership skills and the team work and everything that they learned during their service?
And the second part of the answer to Jerry's about criminal justice is we have to find ways of getting people off the sidelines, as I call it. So we have people with a criminal justice background who have not been able to find a job because they've been prevented. Last year's clean slate legislation worked on by the legislature, we're the first state to do it, helped. The other one we need to do is we have an obligation to the men and women who have served this country that when they leave their military service and they come back to this country, hopefully to this Commonwealth, that we do everything we can to find them a family-sustaining job, to make the best use of their talents and abilities and find something that allows them to re-enter the private sector. So we are working with a lot of veterans groups, finding out where those hurdles are, what they're encountering, where we can assist with that, how we expedite getting them into either 4-year schools or trades or somewhere, because we owe these men and women something very significant because of what they've provided to this Commonwealth and this country. So it's figuring out how we can move people in. It really is a workforce issue, but it's a fairness issue with vets and an issue of respect. And it's a fairness issue on the criminal justice side. Once people have paid their debt, we should find a way of getting them back into society because it'll be cheaper. And you've got some very interesting people lined up, everything from the far right and the far left, business groups, labor groups, all aligned on this, because we realize that it's a fair thing to do and it's a smart thing to do, because it's very expensive to keep that system. And our ultimate goal, to be honest, isn't only to get them employed, it's to hopefully have people employed so they don't get into the problems in the first place.
Right, that's exciting. One quick question is, I know our viewers are excited about all this good news that they're hearing, from you. How do they get in touch with you, and what website is best for them to get more information?
Our website, www.pachamber.org, and we also have a site called protectpajobs.com that allows them to sign up to receive alerts from us.
Okay, great, because you being, the chair or co-chair of this, it's really important because
We'd
I'm
love
sure,
to hear from people on that.
We're on every cable station, throughout the Commonwealth. And so as people hear this, whether it be the middle of the night or during the day, it's always good to have that, the website information, out there.
I'd love to hear from businesses about the hurdles they're seeing. And one of the things we're considering is, do we do, for example, a statewide job posting, like a job bulletin board, where we can align people and put them together? It's something we're thinking about. We're not there yet, though.
And we just spoke with Dr. Martin from IUP about criminal justice reform that you brought up, and that she gave us quite a statistic that on average it's about $50,000 for a prisoner.
Exactly.
And that on average for a student getting is $5,000. So that's 10 times that amount. So as you do more to lessen that price, hopefully then those dollars can go over to our state system and other programs, like Thaddeus Stevens College and Lancaster and others like that, to catch on to what you're talking about with the workforce.
Yeah, the 50,000 number, I've heard anywhere from 45 to 50, but you're absolutely right. That's 2 students full-time in one of the state system schools. So with 1 inmate, we can educate 2 students if we can keep that person out of prison. And look, let's be honest, there are certain people who need to be in prison, who are a threat to all of us. But there's a lot of others who would benefit from alternative types of sentencing. And we're trying to find ways of doing that and trying to find, I think we need to use technology to probably do a better job from a criminal justice perspective as well.
Do you find the public and private colleges and universities and even the technical institutes reaching out more to employers to say, what do you need in employees? What can we do to better align our programs with your needs?
I think there is more of that going on these days. Of course, colleges are desperate for students. Pennsylvania, again, as we've said, is old and unfortunately getting older. There's a declining population, so I think that there's certainly much more of a responsiveness. Look, there's certain places that probably aren't going to do that. A University of Penn is going to be highly competitive, but a lot of others are figuring out, who do we want to attract? What kind of curriculum changes do we need to make to get them in? And talking to local employers or statewide employers to say, what are your needs? And of course, there's a tremendously high percentage of jobs that will be there in 20 years we don't even know about now. And so how do you train a workforce for jobs that are out there 20 years from now? Because things are advancing so quickly. It's one of the challenges we're facing in the Workforce Command Center. How do we develop the workforce? How do we get state government rallied around and producing people for jobs, and we don't really know what those jobs are? But I think part of that is developing a set of core competencies that I think the universities, colleges, career and technical schools are looking at. What are the core competencies that if somebody says, I'm doing this now, but I'd rather move into this, that we can help expedite, because they'll have things, the basic things they need to be able to move over there.
Thank you so much, Gene, for better informing us and keeping all our viewers better informed.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thanks. And we'll be right back next week, with another segment. Thank you.